Welcome to 45 Forward with host, journalist, and speaker, Ron Rowell. Ron's mission is to make your second half of life even better than your first. Most of us are just approaching our half-life when we reach the mid-40s with many productive years ahead. Ron is here to help prepare us for this kind of longevity by providing vital strategies to shift the traditional waiting for retirement model to a continuous, evolving journey of compelling life chapters. So now, please welcome the host of 45 Forward, Ron Rowell.
Welcome, everyone, to 45 Forward on Bold Brave TV. This is your host, Ron Rowell. Now, on today's show, we're dealing with a complicated and emotional topic, gray divorce. What's gray divorce? Well, it's probably what you think it is, which is it's the phenomenon of people getting divorced later in life, generally after 50, but often 60s and 70s. And the interesting twist that I've discovered is that while the divorce rate has probably stayed somewhat stable between 40 and 50%, the divorce rate for younger people has been actually declining, but the divorce rate for older people has actually been dramatically increasing. So that's the topic for today, which is about what is gray divorce about. We have two distinguished New York attorneys, Jennifer Cona and Sandra Radna, who will provide practical and extremely relatable information about this process and how they help silver splitters navigate this complicated transition. They talk about a lot of things from both the divorce side and the estate and planning side and healthcare side. Lots and lots of information. So there's a lot to consider. So let's get right to it. Let's meet my guests, Jennifer Cona and Sandra Radna. Jennifer and Sandra, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Ron. Great to see you.
It's a pleasure, guys. Yeah, we've had a previous conversation, and there is a lot to discuss, and you guys know a lot. So I'm really pleased to have you because, this is something people don't talk about. Certainly when you're getting married, saying, well, let me think, what about getting divorced? But it's a reality in today's society. So I'm glad to have you. And this is going to be a conversation, so we'll just go back and forth. It's not going to be straight Q&A. But why don't we start off with you, Sandra? Just give us a little bit more about gray divorce and how is it really different from people getting divorced in their 30s or 40s? And maybe there's some common myths about it or misconceptions. So let's start with you and Jennifer, as I meant, to jump in on various things as we move along.
Well, the biggest difference between a divorce and an older couple as opposed to a younger couple is that they usually have more assets.
Okay.
They probably have children that are adults, and things are a little bit different from them. The reason that I believe the divorce rate is increasing for people over 50 and decreasing for younger people is that a lot of younger people don't get married in order to have children anymore. So there's less people getting married. And older people who are married are realizing that there's life after 50 and they deserve to be happy and they deserve to have a life. And even if they're 50, 60, people are living into their 90s now. So life isn't over just because they're over 60 years old. They want to be able to be happy. So I would think those are the big differences for why people are getting divorced at higher rates over 50. And the biggest difference is the assets they have. A lot of times when people have adult children and their senior parent is getting remarried, they're very concerned about what's going to happen to my inheritance, what's going to happen to what I was supposed to get. Is this person just going to take my parents' assets? And I'm sure Jennifer is going to talk a little bit about how to protect people for that. But I would say those are the big differences.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it certainly is a much more complicated situation just by virtue of having more assets. And obviously we see a lot more blended families now.
Yeah.
And, we see because people are living longer, we've got multiple generations. So the whole thing becomes much more complicated between elder law, estate planning for long-term care needs, the exorbitant cost of healthcare. So the whole thing is much more complicated. But I definitely agree with you, Sandra, that people are saying themselves, if I'm going to live to 100, which all of us right here on this screen are probably going to live to 100, we want to make sure we're happy, and there's really no reason not to be.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to go back between some bigger pictures and smaller issues. So I think one of the things that comes up sort of immediately that you probably deal with, Jennifer, is um, just like like the advanced directives, the beneficiary designations. So estate plans, like stuff like immediately, like we better change this stuff. So talk about that a little bit.
Sure. And a lot of people don't think about that right away. So, advanced directives, in case your audience members don't know, include the power of attorney, healthcare proxy, and living will. So, the power of attorney is where you name someone to handle finances for you in case you can't, if you're incapacitated or otherwise unable to. So, you want to name someone who can handle finances for you, could be banking, real estate transactions, setting up trust for you. So it could be day-to-day things or big picture items. The healthcare proxy, you're naming someone to be your voice for you as to medical decisions, communicating with doctors. Again, if you can't, you make your decisions up until the point if you cannot. So it's someone who
Hmm.
steps in at that time. And the living will is where you set forth what your wishes are as to end of life care. Do you want artificial nutrition and hydration, heroic measures, or are you more in the camp of if my time has come, let me go? So it's those kinds of decisions. And at least in New York, anyway, your agents have to be the same. Doctors want only one person to listen to.
Hmm.
So the agent under the healthcare proxy has to match the agent under the living will, because that person will be communicating your wishes as the agent under the healthcare proxy, what you've set forth in your living will. So when you're getting divorced, typically you probably had your spouse as that agent, and you
Right.
probably don't want that person handling finances anymore for you, or God forbid, making healthcare decisions for you anymore. And a divorce could take a long time, and Sandra can speak to this, I'm sure. You could be looking at a year, 5 years, 10 years in some cases, if it's complicated. And while that's pending, you probably, if you think about it for a moment, do not want your pending ex-spouse to be in a position to make those decisions for you. So it's something that
Hmm.
you want to take care of right away,
Right.
and there would be no reason not to.
Right.
And then at some point, and often in a divorce decree, and Sandra can speak to this, there may be an instruction where you must change your will.
Mm.
Um, so again, you probably have left assets to your spouse first and then to the children. You're going to want to change that when you're divorced. If you have a blended family, if you remarry in the future, you may want to do what's called a Q-tip trust, where you're leaving income to your second spouse for life, but then the rest of the assets go to
Hmm.
your children from the first marriage. So there's all kinds of things like that that come up.
Right.
Um, and the beneficiary designations, as you mentioned, people forget about that a lot, especially as you're older. Maybe there were policies, term life policies, things of that nature that were set up years and years ago, maybe when your children were born. All of that stuff needs to be changed.
Right.
Pensions, IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, whatever you have.
Right.
And by the ERISA laws, you can't disinherit your spouse. You can't change those designations until you have a final divorce decree. So some
Right.
of that does have to wait until the very end. But, to prepare for that, you want to make sure you have your to-do list. You want to have your assets outlined for yourself so that you know what you need to do when the right time comes. And I'm sure Sandra, being the
Yeah.
excellent divorce attorney, helps her clients through that and says, okay, this happens at this point and this point, so that you don't forget anything, because these are really complicated situations and there's so many moving parts. And
Right.
each of these parts are so critical to get it
Right.
right. You don't want
Yeah.
to leave anything out and then have an ex-spouse suddenly get $1 million life insurance policy or your
Right.
IRA or
Right.
something else because you forgot.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back to you, Santa. Yeah. So let's pick that up. And obviously, Jennifer deals with a lot of estate issues, but there are some, uh, more pressing issues about division of the assets, the property, businesses. Talk a little bit about that. Those can be complicated too. Like, how do you, if your spouse has a business, how do you deal with that? If one of the spouses, didn't work, what is he or she entitled to? So, let's talk about just the treatment of the division of property and assets.
So New York is what's called an equitable distribution state. So
Hmm.
we've heard of there's community property states in the United States and equitable distribution. Community property means that whatever you have at the time that you get divorced, no matter when you acquired it, would be divided 50-50. But New York doesn't do that, and equitable distribution states don't do that. What they do is they look at whatever you acquired during the marriage. So they would
Hmm.
look at the value of an asset at the time you get married and what it is at the time that you got divorced, and the amount that it grew between that time
Hmm.
period is what gets divided. So it's called the marital portion. The courts look at the ending of a marriage as a dissolution of the economic partnership, which is the marriage.
I
So,
see.
with regard to equitable distribution of the marital assets, we look at all the assets that were accumulated during the marriage that are part of the marital estate. And New York does not distinguish between whether it's just in one person's name or not. So if it was accumulated during the marriage, even if it's titled in one spouse's name, it's still marital property, including what a lot of people don't realize is the income that you earned during the marriage. So if one person was working during the marriage, the other spouse was not working during the marriage, and they put money in a savings account in their own name, that working spouse, that is still a marital asset to be divided.
Hmm.
So what we do when there's a divorce is you take all of the marital assets that becomes part of what we call the marital estate, and it all gets divided. So if one party has a retirement account that's worth $50,000 and the other one has a retirement account that's worth, I don't know, $1 million, it's going to
Hmm.
be $1,050,000, and that's going to be divided. It's not that one person's going to get a lower amount. They're going to end up with an even amount, assuming that was all acquired during the marriage. If $500,000 of that $1 million in retirement was acquired prior to the marriage, that would remain that spouse's separate property, and only the remaining 500,000 that was accumulated during the marriage would get divided. So that's about the assets. With regard to spousal support, that's a
Hmm.
statutory formula, a formula by law that the court puts into place. And the amount depends on the amount of income that the person is making. So when you have a senior person or someone over 50 or over 60 getting divorced, a lot of times the courts aren't going to make them work till they're 90 years old in order to pay spousal support,
Right.
even though the duration is typically one third the duration, the length of the marriage is usually the amount of spousal support. So there's a few things that we do. Sometimes if someone's continuing to work, they
Hmm.
will continue to pay spousal support during that time. But if they retire and they're going to be getting a pension and the spouse is entitled to 50% of that pension, for example, assuming it was all marital, then the spousal support would typically start, um, typically stop once the pension starts. So they don't want to leave one spouse in a situation where they can't provide for their own food, clothing, and shelter because they don't have a source of income just because somebody else is retiring. So the courts look for a way to make that equitable, either through payment of a pension or assets, or maybe payment of the amount of spousal support they would have gotten in a lump sum uh, all at once.
Right. Wow, a lot to consider.
Mhm.
So we're going to continue. We have we're going to have to take a break in about 30 seconds, but um, uh, I want to shift a little bit to think about it, and we'll pick it up after the break. But just going back and forth, we've seen some of these really technical legal issues, which are important to really think them through. But then talk about a little bit on the emotional components on both sides of the issue. So, because as you mentioned, Jennifer, they blended families, but then you would just have adult kids, and now they're not kids; they're adults. Um, Gets very complicated. So, when we come back, we can talk about that, and then go back into some of the more technical issues, which are still important. Before we continue, though, I want people to know we'll be talking much more with Jennifer Cona and Sandra Radna, two distinguished attorneys about gray divorce. So don't go anywhere.
Mike Zorich, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorich, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorich has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back, folks, to 45 Forward. We're talking today with attorneys Jennifer Cona and Sandra Radna about gray divorce, a growing trend of people getting divorced later in life. Before the break, we were talking about a number of very pragmatic issues. I wanted to step back a little bit, and these are pragmatic as well, but in a different way, and that is the emotional components of splitting up, which I'm sure that each of you in different ways, as you're carrying out your technical expertise, think, am I a psychologist as well? You know, so how do you work with your clients, give advice about, how to communicate with their children? Now, of course, some may have younger children, but they have usually adult children, maybe they have grandchildren. Any thoughts from either of you on how to deal with how to communicate with the rest of your family to minimize conflict if you can? I'll go back with you, Sandra, and then maybe Jennifer jump in.
Okay, I think that there are some older people that have young children, but the majority of them have older children.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, what happens is the children pick sides.
Mm-hmm.
They side with one parent or the other, and that makes it very difficult. It's very difficult for the person going through it to think that their parent, their child doesn't believe their narrative and they're believing
Mm-hmm.
their spouse's narrative. Is very emotional. And the only thing that I advise them to do is to just keep talking to them, keep the lines of communication open, don't disparage the other parent, don't say anything bad about them, but at the same time, if there's anything that's said that's false, tell them what the truth is. Say, here's what really happened, and
Mm-hmm.
try to show them some proof of that. Remember, this is what was happening on that day. The most important thing that I tell people is don't involve the kids. It's even if they're adults, they don't want to be in the middle. They want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
love both of you. They don't want to hear the terrible things that their parent did to the other one. It shouldn't involve them. And people sometimes say, oh, they have a right to know. They really don't. They don't need to know. They don't need to know any of that. They just need to know that this is between the two of us. It's not working out and we're just going to move on, but we still love you, even when they're adults. And I
Right.
think that's if they could do that, those are the divorces that are the happiest.
Right.
If it sounds like an oxymoron, but
Right.
it can be amicable if people are able to say, look, we don't get along. We're going to move on with our lives, but we're going to still be really nice to our kids
Mm-hmm.
and not
Right.
make them pick sides.
Right, right. And Jen, I guess on the asset side or the legacy side, that can get complicated too. Like, oh, how do you split the assets to your kids that they have opinions about, who should get what and so forth. So, any thoughts on that? And
Yeah, I mean, it really is complicated, and I think that on both sides, the parties get concerned and a little freaked out because the kids are worried what's going to happen to the money I'm supposed to inherit,
Mm-hmm.
and is some new spouse going to get my inheritance, quote unquote. That's a legitimate concern, I suppose. And the parents that are splitting up tend to think, well, why are my kids, swarming looking for the money, and why are they so concerned about that? And it
Mm-hmm.
feels ugly on both sides. And so it really calls on our counselor at law skills, which they don't teach us in law school. You only learn it and earn it in practice. But it's a pretty tough needle to thread. But we have to do that very carefully and always remember that our obligations run to the client, not to the kids, not
Right.
to parents, not to kids. Whoever our client is, that's who we have to advise and whose side we're on and who we're advocating for. But to Sandra's point, the most important thing is keeping the lines of communication open, because when you do that, not that you want your kids involved in your divorce, but just that when you're including family members in on the big decisions, whether it's the estate planning or the advance directives or what might or might not happen at the end of the day with a divorce, that transparency takes away the secrecy and the fear, because it's the fear that makes families fight, right? The
Mm-hmm.
fear, the concern, what's happening with the money, what's going to happen at the end of the day. That's where everybody gets crazy and the families split apart. And we see the same thing in estate litigation when someone passes away. It's the same thing as a divorce, except someone has passed away. That's the only difference.
Right. Right.
But it's all about not knowing, and that drives the fear. So opening up those lines of communication to the extent you can while you're going through the divorce and certainly after, so everyone knows what's my role, what's going to happen, what's the intention, can really take the steam out, and keep everybody a little bit more calm, and make sure everyone knows what the intention is and how you expect it to play out at the end of the day, in terms of assets, not in terms of who did what or what caused the divorce. That isn't anybody
Right.
else's business.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I've done a lot of work in issue of family caregiving, and when spouse, especially when in my case when my dad passed away, I was in charge of basically setting up the caregiving plan for my mom, and even with other siblings, so it's like, okay, what again, what happens now, and the tendency, as you said, Jen, is that the kids get involved, and they have to realize that stop. The client is your mother or father. It's not you. You want to
Yes.
keep the
Yeah.
lines open of communication, but that's my client, and so if there are some conflicts, I've found what you need to do is the parent, and just in this case, often needs to communicate with the kids, saying, "Listen, this is what I wanted. It's not, this isn't, a battle between you, and even if it doesn't seem fair, this is what I want, for my
Yep.
family." Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
On the
absolutely.
divorce side, I just want
Hmm.
to add to what Jennifer's saying about keeping the children involved. So, keeping the children involved on the divorce side doesn't mean saying, here's how rotten your other parent was. But
Right.
it
Hmm.
does say that if they are going to get remarried and there's going to be a prenuptial agreement, for example,
Hmm.
prior to that marriage, the children knowing that, look, this life insurance policy that I have, you're still going to be the beneficiary, and I'm going to have another one,
Right.
the new spouse, but it's not going to take away from what you have. Or, yes, I'm going to let new spouse live in the house with me, but the house is being left to you. So those things, those types of plans, that does give a lot of comfort to the children. I've had children be there for that reason, just for a prenup or even a postnup, or just
Hmm.
having a discussion. I had a situation once where somebody, an older person who had a terminal illness, was marrying his nurse's aide,
Hmm.
because she was really nice to him and she was a great caregiver, and he wanted her to have a better life. And he had the son there, and the children liked her, but they were concerned about their inheritance. And he told them that he specifically had a certain amount of money that was just for her and nothing
Hmm.
else was touched for the children. And he wanted them there for that discussion, even though it was just a prenuptial agreement that we were doing, just so they were comforted to know that they were protected, even though they liked this woman. She was just there for a short amount of time. And it did bring comfort to the family to know that and to be part of that discussion, so that it
Hmm.
wasn't their father just saying something. It was something he was actually doing.
Right, right.
That goes a long way because otherwise you could be looking at a will contest when the father passes away and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of transparency is really terrific.
Yeah, yeah. So there are things too that I think either one of you might be able to deal with some of these things, but obviously it's difficult, and I guess it's especially it's changing because women are getting more involved in the workplace and they're working as well as their spouse. But it seems to me that it can be particularly difficult still for women in terms of financial independence afterward. Um, and so I want to talk about things like insurance coverage, whether it's the designations for life insurance, beneficiaries, but also Social Security. Jen, what about? I mean, I guess Social Security is a big issue in terms of what
Mhm.
happens to their benefits when they get divorced.
Sure. So, when you in a married couple, when one of them passes away, the survivor gets the higher benefit of the two.
Right.
So when you're thinking about divorce, that's a consideration, especially if the spouse has maybe taken a period of time out of the workforce to raise the children and whatnot. Their Social Security by default is going to be much lower. So that's something to really consider. And if you're coming up with a divorce settlement, you're going to want to have assets to offset that through other means. Um, Other things to think about are long-term care insurance. Let's say that couple who's divorcing has a long-term care policy. You're going to want to make sure that as part of the settlement negotiations that both spouses are going to continue to be covered, because in a typical long-term care policy, you'll probably have spousal care. Now that's not going to be the case. You're not spouses any longer. And let's say the policy was taken out when you're 40 or 50, and now you're divorcing at 70. You can't go get a new policy. It'll be 3 times as expensive, and maybe you have medical issues that will disqualify you from being eligible altogether. So there's things like that that have to be considered that don't come to the top of your mind if your marriage is not necessarily so great or it's really horrible. But you're not going to think, oh, but what about my Social Security or what about my long-term care? But these are realistic things that you want to really hash out and say, what,
Hmm.
what are the impacts? What are the practical impacts here?
Hmm.
Well, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize with regard to Social Security, just to Jennifer's point, one spouse may be making a lot less money than the other spouse who didn't pay in as much into Social Security. But
Hmm.
in addition to the death benefits with Social Security, the less moneyed spouse can get Social Security as long as they've been married for 10 years or longer, based on the more moneyed spouse's Social Security pay in.
Right.
And they will be able to use that amount without diminishing the moneyed spouse's Social Security benefits. So they would get the benefit of the higher pay into Social Security, so a higher Social Security payment, as long as they've been married for at least 10 years based on their spouse. So it really helps a lot in a silver divorce, a silver splitter, or a gray divorce,
Mhm.
because that gives security. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll say, for example, health insurance will stay in place until someone's Medicare eligible.
Okay.
Spousal support will continue until they're able to get Social Security to supplement that, plus maybe a pension benefit that they're going to be getting from their spouse. And it does make it easier, because what we're thinking about is, how will somebody financially survive after the
Hmm.
divorce?
Right.
And so they're going to be getting whatever their share of the assets are. But what if they don't have a lot of assets? Then we rely on the Social Security and the percentage of the retirement benefits in order for that person to survive financially.
Right. Right. And another term, other kinds of insurance coverage, life insurance, disability, all that stuff. You deal with that as well, Sandra? Or you?
Well, life insurance, it depends. If it's just a term policy that's in place, there's no value to be split. It would just be keeping that policy in effect. But if, to Jennifer's point, if the term is going to expire, it's hard to get another policy when you're older, especially if you have health issues. But if there's a whole life policy, the value of that whole life policy, the the face value, I think is what it's called, whatever the redemption value is for that policy will be split. That's considered a marital asset. So, and depending if they've already paid off that policy, which usually they have by that point, they'll be getting that. Plus, you could have that policy remain in place for the remainder of the time that the spouse is entitled to spousal support. And then it could be changed once that's over.
Right, right. I'm going to do this again at the end of the show, but there's so much information. You guys know, have so much knowledge. I want to just take a moment to let our audience know how they can get in touch with each of you and your websites and contact information and any events you might have, webinars coming up. So Jennifer, why don't I start with you and then Sandra?
Sure. So our website is conaelderlaw.com, same as my
Mm-hmm.
last name, CONA, elder, ELDER, law.com. Phone number is 631-390-5000.
Mm-hmm.
We always have events going on. We have webinars at least 2 times a week. We have special events. Just go to our website and check out our events calendar. And we also have e-blasts that inform the community of what we have coming up. So you can get on our email list by going to the website as well.
Right. Good. Okay. And Sandra?
My website is radnalaw.com, RADNALAW.com. We're all very creative. My phone number is 631-754-6382. If people want more information about divorce, I did write a book. It's called You're Getting Divorced, Now What? And it has
Mm-hmm.
a lot of information. And in addition, I'm on every social media platform, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. I do short videos about questions that are common that people have about divorce, and in short 1 minute digestible segments. So a lot of times people have questions. They don't know the questions that they have, but when they hear it,
Mm-hmm.
they say, oh yeah, I was wondering about that. So
Right. Right. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't know
Yeah.
what you don't know in these areas of law,
that's
unfortunately.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I'm sure you come in situations where like, I never came across that before, you know. Yeah, great. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned your book. Um, yeah, appropriate. You're getting divorced. Now what? Yep, absolutely. Um, so anything in the course of well, let me just before I get into our last few thoughts. And anything surprising that you've learned over the years that you didn't expect when you got into this profession? Um, um, Sandra,
I would
anything?
I would say something about the older divorces. The oldest person that came to me to get a divorce was 68 years old,
Mhm.
and he was in a terrible marriage. He was just really unhappy. His wife was just really mean to him, and his children were adults. He finally got the courage to get divorced. And by the time his divorce was done, he was 71 years old. And he ran into his high school sweetheart, believe it or not, whose husband had passed away, and they got remarried. And they've been extremely happily married for the last 6 years. And I think a lot of people would have thought 68 years old, like, what's he thinking? He didn't even think he would get married again. He just thought that he was going to live his lonely life when he was done, when he was done. And he is just so happy now. And what I would say is that everybody deserves a happy ending. Everybody deserves to live a life where they're not walking on eggshells every time they go home and or just miserable or don't even want to go home because of what's waiting there. And I think that the biggest lesson from that is everyone deserves to be happy.
Right.
And that I always think of him, that he has a happy ending. He stays in touch with me, and I just love it.
Yeah, I think that is. I mean, look, it's in many ways painful. It's a loss of a chunk of your life. So there's that sense of loss. But as you point out, I think that there's a sense of relief too in many of these cases. And as it's not everything works, And there's a term that I've often used, which is radical acceptance. It is what it is, and it doesn't mean that you can't do anything about it. It just means you accept it and you need to move on and plan something else. So I think that that's a valuable lesson. Anything else you want to add, Jen, to your experiences?
I think that in my field, I certainly can't make these kinds of decisions for clients, but I can guide people to get resources, support and resources, community resources, help people lean on what's available to them to make the right decisions for themselves. And, the way our firm practices law is all about empowerment, education
Hmm.
and empowerment so that someone can get to the right conclusion for them. Because we should all have happy lives and, have the second half, the third quarter, or whatever you want to call it, be the best it can be. And like I said before, it could, when you're in your 50s, you could be looking at another 50 years. So you want that to be the best you can be. And that decision should not be hasty, whether you stay with someone and rebuild, because there could be a lot of rebuilding, say, after the kids go to college. That's a typical time when you're suddenly looking at someone afresh and maybe you don't like them much, or maybe you can reinvigorate that relationship.
Right.
Or maybe it just, needs to be, maybe you just need to start over and it's not rehabable. But either way, you need a good support system in place. And if you don't have one, because a lot of people do have only married friends at that point, you kind of got to start all over. So put that in place and have other people help you make those kinds of decisions, I would say.
Right. Right. So we just have a few more minutes before the end of the show. We're going to do a wrap up, but I think we're going to take another quick break, and then we'll come back with our final thoughts from Jennifer Cona and Sandra Radna. So don't go away. We just have a quick wrap up.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back, folks. Again, we're talking today with attorneys Jennifer Cona and Sandra Radna about great divorce. Now, before we continue, I just wanted to let you know that if your friends or colleagues miss this live show, don't worry. They can always listen to replays of my conversation on the Bold Brave TV YouTube channel, or just click on 45 Forward playlist. You can listen to audio replays on many major platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. So, going back and forth as we are between sort of the micro and macro, I wanted to have Sandra pick up some stuff about, the pragmatics of health insurance and COBRA, if necessary, in these cases of great divorce.
So in the case of great divorce, health insurance is a very big issue. People are very concerned about losing their health insurance. So
Right.
I discussed before that we might wait till Medicare kicks in. But what we
Mhm.
do if the parties are still working, we put in the stipulation of settlement, which is the document that you live by when you get divorced, when the health insurance will end. So by law, once you get divorced, you don't have to have your spouse on your health insurance. So we might maybe do a separation agreement, a legal separation, until the parties are reaching Medicare age. If the moneyed spouse is still working and they're getting health insurance through the job, COBRA would be in effect for however long. And once it ended with the divorce, they would
Mm-hmm.
be able to continue to health insurance with COBRA. The
Right.
other thing that it's important for the listeners to know is if somebody owns a business, or
Mm-hmm.
if the children are worried about what's going to happen to the house, we refer to those different agreements within the divorce stipulation of settlement. So if
Mm-hmm.
there's an agreement with regard to the division of the business or what's going to happen with the business, that's referred to in the agreement. And I'll ask Jennifer to talk a little bit about trust, because that's
Mm-hmm.
something that we refer to also. If a house is being protected in a trust for the children, I would refer to that or to life insurance policy. So maybe Jennifer could talk a little bit about that mechanism.
Great. Go ahead.
So especially with gray divorce and silver splitters, at that time in their lives, you're looking at protecting assets for
Mm-hmm.
long-term care purposes. So person may want to start at that point by putting a house in a trust, maybe other assets as well. So that's a Medicaid asset protection trust. So at that point, you're looking at the 5-year look back period. So the sooner the better someone should be engaging in that kind of asset protection planning. And once divorced, you no longer have the option of spousal refusal planning. So that's the key point here. In terms of life insurance trust, that's for estate tax planning purposes. And again, once divorced, if you're a single person, you don't have that estate tax planning portability of maximizing, by doubling your federal and New York State estate tax benefits. So it's another consideration. Your estate tax planning profile is going to change entirely, and you're going to need to revamp your whole plan there as well.
Now, I guess you have to sort of settle what happens to assets like the house before you then can put them in a trust for purposes of protection for Medicaid planning purposes, right? I mean,
Right.
Well, and it's two different things. So it could be put in for Medicaid planning purposes, and it could be put in because if the child, for example, is going to be a sole beneficiary of the trust and the child is worried about losing that house, it could be put in for that purpose too, in a
okay,
trust that is irrevocable. And this way the child feels comfortable, the adult child feels comfortable that if the parent gets remarried, that it's not going to go to somebody else, or that
right.
they're not going to sell it and leave them with nothing. So again, it's just something to make everybody comfortable, and that helps in the relationship also. So sometimes there's multiple properties. We might want to discuss what's going to happen to each property, and you
Mm-hmm.
would work with a trust and estates attorney to make sure, either in a will or by a document or by a trust, maybe if there's 3 children, there's 3 houses, to make sure that the houses are going to go to each child. So
Mm-hmm.
the stipulation of settlement, which is the divorce, really works hand in hand with the other agreements that are done in planning. Everything is planning. And when there's planning, everything goes smoothly. When there's not planning, then it
Mm.
becomes very difficult later on for the family when we're trying to figure it out. So one of the things Jennifer mentioned is people forgetting to change things. So what we do is, once a party gets divorced, once they're done with their stipulation of settlement, which is a long document, it could be 50 to 80 pages long, we give
Mm.
them a closing letter that kind of gives them the abridged version of, here's everything that needs to be done and here's what you need to do now, because it's easier for someone to look at something that's 3 pages long that says here's the dates when you have to do everything, than to look at the whole document, even though they'll look at that document here and there. And even with that, our clients will call us and say, when was I supposed to do this? Or when is this due? Or what should I do? But if you give them a checklist, which it sounds like Jennifer does the same thing that we do, if you give them a checklist, then they know,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I have to do all of these things now.
Right.
And yeah.
One thing on the flip side of the assets that you mentioned me to before, Sandra, is just on the liabilities. What happens to the debt that the family has?
Well, the debt is something that should be taken care of as part of the divorce. So you shouldn't be
Okay.
leaving debt on the table. So we try to take care of everything. So the debts are split the same way as the assets are. So if there are debts, We want to have all of that taken care of beforehand. And then we also add that neither party can accumulate debt or incur debt in the other party's name once we have this stipulation of settlement. And we talk about what each person is going to be responsible for if there weren't enough assets to get rid of all the debt and pay off the debt.
Right, right. So, any advice for someone over 50 who's thinking about divorce, but feels like it, uh, can think about what to do before it's too late? I mean, planning is part of it. I mean, and of course, I suppose the mediation could be part of it. Like, wait a minute, all right, this is where we're headed. But any
Well, I
sort
can
of
talk about the difference between mediation and a litigated divorce. Mediation is
okay,
one person that's sitting with both parties to try to
hmm
discuss the major issues. So the issues are always who's going to stay in the marital residence. There's no custody issues anymore because the children are usually adults. But then the rest is division of the marital assets. And the biggest problem that people have is they don't know what assets they have. So the less moneyed spouse, for example, might never have dealt with anything. They don't know what they really have. So if someone's thinking about it, start getting familiar with what assets you have. What do you own? What are your financials? Do you have a brokerage account? How are things titled? Where are documents? And the assets could be anywhere from stocks, brokerage accounts, cryptocurrency, digital assets, real estate, uh, cars, vehicles, whatever it is. You should know where everything is and how it's titled, because it's very difficult once the divorce starts to find those things if you don't know about them already.
yeah,
And that's the same
and
thing for elder law planning and estate planning. You have to
hmm
know where all of your assets are, whose name they're in, the sum and substance of them. So it's really all about getting your ducks in a row, gathering all that information so that we can adequately deal with that. So it works the same way for Sandra as it does for the planning that I have to do. And then we take it from there and we're able to deal with the information and deal with it properly, because we don't want to have surprises, right, Sandra? We don't want
right,
unknown things to pop up through the process, because then we can't handle it properly.
right, right,
One of the things that we always put in our agreements is if someone did not disclose something and we find it out after the divorce, that the spouse that it was not disclosed to will still get 50% in the future. So
mm,
if it pops up later on, so someone can't feel like they pulled a fast one on someone, we can always, if we find that out, they could still be entitled to it. So that's just really the safety net. But the more you know before you start the process, the better.
yeah.
And that's the most important thing.
Yeah, agreed. Just and thinking about what both of you said, yeah, I think the essence of knowing this stuff is important, no matter what the circumstance. So, in the case of just elder law planning, um, I think one of the issues that came up in my family is that so it's not a divorce, but if one of the spouses suddenly dies, and the other spouse doesn't know this information,
Yeah,
that's and it's not uncommon, right? I mean,
yeah,
my family had sort of a traditional, you know, breakdown of tasks and assignments and responsibilities. My dad had the assets. My mom had the monthly budgeting, but didn't know about the assets. So it's important, even because that's a sudden break. It's not a divorce, but it's a death, and you need to know this information. So
Yeah, some people, some spouses don't even know how much they spend a month. They don't know how
yeah,
much they need to live on because they just use the checkbook or they just use the credit card. So you really have to know, how much do I need a month to live on before
hmm
you can even start a divorce, because if you don't know those numbers, you might just accept something as a settlement that doesn't allow you to live the lifestyle that you're accustomed to,
exactly.
or even close to it. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but you have to be able to afford a place to live and to buy food and have a car to drive and put gas in it.
yeah,
So those are really important things to know. So
Yeah,
planning
great,
is always key.
great.
yep. Planning is always key, and education and resources are always key.
Right, right. Well, on that note, I want to thank both of you, Jennifer and Sandra, for a great show. You crammed a lot in. People could listen to it in a podcast again and review it because it's a lot to retain. But I want to thank you for a terrific conversation. Again, just if people want to contact you, what's the best way to do that, Jennifer?
So for me, it is 631-390-5000 or our website, which is conaelderlaw.com.
Okay.
And
Sandra?
my phone number is 631-754-6382. And my website is radnalaw.com, RADNALAW.com.
Great. Okay. So once again, folks, this has been Ron Rowell, the host of 45 Forward on Bold Brave TV. Thanks for spending the hour with me. And I always learn from my own shows, and I hope you do too. I want to thank also my engineer, Alex, who's part of a terrific team that guides me through every week. And so, folks, be sure to join me next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be talking to Emiliana Vegas. She's the author of a recent book, Let's Change the World, which offers a practical and encouraging guide for people, no matter what their age, who want to spur positive change through their professional organization. So, folks, until that time, keep moving forward, 45 Forward.
This has been 45 Forward with host Ron Rowell. Tune in each week as Ron tackles the many aspects of health, finance, family and friends, housing, work, and personal pursuits, all as part of an integrated plan and to take charge of your unretiring life during these uncertain times. Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.